Welcome to Louisiana Heartbeats. I'm Sudie Landry, and again today we have another author, but this author has a new twist on an old topic. He is Jack Caldwell. He's a historical romance author. He has written many books with facts in his fiction stories. So I want to welcome you to the show.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here today.
Jack Caldwell and I met at a book signing in Thibodaux, Louisiana, which I found out that he's originally from there, but has recently moved to Prairieville, Louisiana.
Yes.
Okay, I want to share and have some things about Jack. First of all, I've enjoyed the conversation that we had prior to this actual show. I'm learning a whole lot about how historical fiction stories are written and why different people take a certain angle. But I'm here to tell you, Katiana, that as a lady wanting to read historical fiction, this is the first time I'm actually interested. Usually, it's very blah, 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 fact, fact, fact. But Jack has a special twist on his. He takes characters, creates them, and incorporates them with fact in his fiction romantic stories. So, I can't say anything else then. Let's just go ahead and tell him, Jack, how in the world did you start wanting to write this as a male? Okay, most stories like this are written by women romance. What interested you?
What interested me was I discovered somebody called Jane Austen. This happened many, many years ago, back in around 1980, 1981, when I saw the first miniseries of Jane Austen's works on public television. And then, of course, we all know about the 1995 TV production with Colin Firth. Well, a few years after that, I decided to discover if someone had ever written a sequel to, say, Pride and Prejudice. I found something called fan fiction on the internet, and I started reading these things. The reason I was fascinated with Jane Austen is for a female writer, she understood men. Unfortunately, many female writers don't, just like many male writers don't quite understand females. So by reading that encouraged me to see what I could do to write in a genre that will not just appeal to men, but also appeal to women, to understand women and write women as women. And so it was kind of a challenge for me.
I love what you said. You're also married, and your wife, you had mentioned about information about she was such a support system for you.
Right.
Why?
It's really interesting. She's been my...
As a writer, support system.
She's support. She's one of my editors. She's the person I basically dedicate all my work to. And as I was talking about these fan fiction, these stories that I saw on the internet, I would talk to her about some of the stuff I was reading. And some of it was excellent. And today's, a lot of that work that I originally read on the internet are now published novels. Some of it was not so good. And I would share with her the plot holes I saw in it, and inconsistencies, and other issues I had with those writers. And I did this for some time until my beautiful and lovely wife over breakfast one day reached over, touched my hand and said, "Okay, Buster, let's see you do any better." So I did. Eventually that book was the second book I had published. But she gave me a challenge to see I could take the stories in my head and tie it to my love of history, merge those two things together, and write something that's interesting to people. And now, 9 books later, I continue to do this.
Jack, I'm looking at something that I highlighted that I wanted to bring up among many other things, is that the fact that you use your work to share the knowledge of history.
There are 2 things that I'm trying to do with my work, and the first thing is history. To me, history is the great story of mankind. Why we are the way we are. What happened? How did we get there? What forces, what people got us to where we are today? But there's a boring way of telling history, and there's an interesting way of telling history. I'm one of the few that likes the boring. I will pick up a history book and read it. Most people will be bored to tears. Well, I'm not the first person to invent historical fiction. You can go back to people like Nathaniel Hawthorne. You can go back to people like James Michener. You can go back to people like Margaret Mitchell. These are people who took original characters, put them in real situations, interacting with real historical figures, and are able to tell not only an interesting story, but tell accurate history. And for example, Gone with the Wind is a historical fiction book about Reconstruction Georgia. It's accurate. The things that happened in that book actually happened to people during and after the Civil War in Georgia. So this is why I do what I do, and that's the fun part about this. The other thing is to talk about the human condition, why people interact, how you get this crazy idea that men and women can actually get along and live together. That's always been fascinating to me. And so through that work is the reason I kind of got into the romantic part, is how both can kind of stumble around and yet come into a partnership that's stronger than the sum of the parts.
I love what you had mentioned earlier about something to the fact that she doesn't want to be a man and you don't want to be a woman, but yet y'all can work together and understand.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just wonderful. Everybody brings their own strengths to a relationship, so let's talk about that. And this is how it builds people up instead of tearing people down.
Jack, I want to know, before we go into more details about these other wonderful series like what's on the screen right now, the Cajun Cheesehead, you want to share with us why you're known as that?
Well, for the first 48 years of my life, I lived in Louisiana. I was actually living with my wife and family in Covington when Katrina happened. Fortunately, our house survived, but my job did not. At the time, I was a professional economic developer working in the city of New Orleans. And for work, my wife and I were forced to leave the state. We ended up in Wisconsin. My wife's family is originally from Wisconsin, so there wasn't an alien place for her, but it certainly was for me. And because of that, my wife is actually a Green Bay Packers fan. I don't mind the Packers, but my favorite team is still the Saints. So I became this kind of Cajun cheesehead, and the name kind of stuck. I kind of like it, so I've kept it. So that's why I'm known now as the Cajun cheesehead.
Which it does kind of work into your character a little bit. It gives you a little bit more freedom to be who you are, which is an author, amateur historian, professional economic developer. What's this about playwright, though? I mean, that's
Years
new.
ago, I was involved in community theater in both Thibodaux and in Covington. And while in Covington, I actually wrote a play. And the playmakers there was kind enough to produce it. I was able to put it on. So I'm a published playwright as well.
And what was the name of that play?
Short Squeeze. It was talking about some of the things I saw during my first career, which was as a stockbroker, and what happened during the 1987 crash. And for those of you who are old enough to remember that, it was quite an event. But it's told for laughs.
You know what, Jack? It's amazing to me, since I'm the president of the Writers Guild of Acadiana, and we're telling people all the time, do not get discouraged if you get rejection letters. Just keep on keeping on. And here you are telling me before the show that unfortunately for you, I think your words were, I'd never received one. I'd say that's a blessing. That's a compliment.
It is a blessing. To tell that story, when my wife challenged me to write these stories, originally they were posted on these boards on the internet. One of my friends on the internet, a woman named Abigail Reynolds, and I'm going to give her a plug. She's
She deserves
fantastic. By then had started publishing her own work, and we had become friends. And one day she told me, Jack, your stuff is too good not to get published. Here, this is the name of my publisher, send them something. They accepted my first manuscript. And so I don't have a wall of rejection letters, so what can I
So
say?
that says a whole lot, which you'll understand later, Acadiana, why he has so many published books. This thing about ramblings of a Cajun in exile,
Again, they also came from my 10-year exile from Louisiana in Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Florida. I've moved back to Louisiana about 9 months ago and now moved into our new home in Prairieville.
and you also, naturally being from Louisiana, know how to cook.
Well,
Are you trying?
all good Cajun men should know how to cook. And if you don't, get off your keister and learn.
That's it. Okay, well, look, since we have the Crescent City posted back as our background with your 3 books up there, okay, that's your series, right?
It's one of the 2 series I basically wrote.
Okay.
So let's talk a little bit about Crescent City.
Yes.
Crescent City was, again, coming back to my experiences during Hurricane Katrina. Due to my background in economic development, I was here during Hurricane Katrina. Immediately afterwards, I served as a FEMA contractor. My wife ran a nonprofit in the Upper Ninth Ward, and so she was one of the first ones back into the city when it was dry enough to get there. We were there. We saw this. We knew the background of what happened. Well, when we relocated to Wisconsin, we were absolutely shocked at the bad information that was common knowledge up there. Even with the good-hearted folks from the Midwest who came down time after time after time to the Gulf Coast, to New Orleans, to Plaquemines, to St. Bernard, to Gulfport, to help in the rebuilding. They still believed a lot of the fantasies and mistaken information that was presented during the disaster. When I heard a U.S. congressman say that, why are we spending money trying to rebuild New Orleans, let's just abandon the place, I got mad. But instead of writing letters to the editor, I wrote a 300,000-word argument why New Orleans matters.
Awesome.
And that is Crescent City. Now, why did it take 300,000 words to do it?
You had a lot to say.
Well, I could have just written a story about exactly what happened during the hurricane. But it occurred to me that except for people in the Gulf Coast, they don't know what New Orleans is. They don't know how important the port of New Orleans is. That is the most important port in the United States. They don't know what we know about this area. So for them to care, I have to get them to fall in love with New Orleans, with South Louisiana, with the Gulf Coast, and the people who live there. So the first 2 books, Bourbon Street Nights and Elysian Dreams, do that. It takes the reader through several friends as they grow up, develop, become relationships, marry, have children, learn what New Orleans really is, learn what Louisiana really is, so that in the 3rd book, when Katrina happens, they actually care what happens to the character.
Okay, let's back up then. Let's tell them the Bourbon Street Nights is volume 1
Of Crescent City.
and you cover that a little bit.
Right. Basically, I introduced 3 couples. I steal a little of the plots away from Jane Austen on those novels just to kind of push the story along. You have one couple that has a hard time getting along. You have another couple who they don't realize they like each other until the last minute. And the 3rd one is a girl who falls in love with the wrong guy. And because of that, she is injured and hurt, and she eventually finds that the friend who helps her is the man that she needs to love. And this all takes place during one semester, well, I say 1 year, while they're all in college.
And book number 2, Elysian Dreams.
Elysian Dreams takes place 5 years later. They're all graduated. They're all now young working people in the Crescent City, basically following their Elysian dream, whether it's being successful in their careers in music or science, trying to start a family, or just trying to find that special someone to spend the rest of their lives with. And that happens during the year, the summer of 2004 to the summer of 2005.
Jack, what I found interesting was that in the first book, Bourbon Street Nights, volume 1, that you said that there were 3 friends. Now, Elizabeth, a Cajun,
Right.
Okay, the three characters, say, are
Right.
they the same characters that you bring
Yes.
through?
Right, this is
Okay.
the families that follow through. You have Elizabeth, who's originally from the Bayou Country of Louisiana.
Okay.
You have Marianne, who's originally from Mississippi. And then you have Emma, who's a Jewish girl from uptown New Orleans. And yet these are, from their various different backgrounds, they become the closest of friends. And so you're able to explore a lot of their relationships and their backgrounds that exist.
That's
here
why I
in the
wanted
South.
to go back to that, because then you bring them through book 2, and then book 3.
Book 3 is the storm.
Is the
And what
actual
happens
storm
to
itself.
them, and what happens to their friends, their co-workers, and other folks in the area.
Okay, so the book 3 in that series, Ruins.
Ruin and renewal.
Okay, and that actually talks about the actual disaster
Yes.
of Katrina.
Also at Katrina, and what I try to weave in there is what actually happened, the facts, who's really at fault, and it's also the aftermath. It's not just the storm. It's that terrible, terrible month of September, which was almost worse than the storm, because we lived in this purgatory for an entire month. And then the slow, agonizing, painful rebuilding that we had to go through to try to get the city and get the region back on its feet to continue onward, because that's the type of people who live in the Gulf Coast. Whether you're in Gulfport, whether you're in St. Bernard, whether you're in Covington or New Orleans or Lafayette or anywhere else, you know what it takes when one of these things hit. We just move on, we go forward, and we rebuild. And that's what Ruin and Renewal is all about.
Well, you know, Jack, I have actually run into some of the survivors, like a lot of us have, that's actually transplanted from New Orleans, trying to build up to get back there also. And it's true, whenever you said in your article on your webpage, the survivors must pick up the pieces of their shattered lives.
Yes.
But then here's the bureaucratic bumbling by the government officials, and it proves too much for some of them.
Exactly.
And they're kind of like spread all over the United States.
And that also is reflected, I don't want to give too much of a
Yeah,
spoiler on the,
right.
on the book,
Right.
but there are 3 groups of people. You have those who remained, those who, like myself, had to leave for a while until they were able to return, and then there are those who will never return.
That's right.
And that's all reflected in the book as well.
And the ones that will never return have some of the most awesome stories to share.
Right.
And I've had one on here and one getting ready to come, and that spirit of survival.
Right.
But let's not lose the history
Right.
of the struggle and the story within the story.
Exactly.
Now, before we move into another series that you're doing, or your other novels, I want to be sure to get that quote in there that I've got. And I want to know if you made it up. It takes a real man to write historical fiction. So let me tell you a story.
I have to admit, I wrote that one.
You wrote that one. I love that. Okay? So there's a whole lot of interesting books that you have out
Yeah,
there.
before we get into the other series, Crescent City also ignited something in me, is to tell more about the history of Louisiana. And so what I did was, I jumped back 200 years, and I was able to have this done prior to the 200th anniversary of the Battle of New Orleans, is I have turned Crescent City from a trilogy into an entire series of novels about the history of Louisiana. And we begin that with kind of the prequel to all this, which is a book called The Plains of Chalmette. And this is, again, a historically accurate retelling of what happened leading up to and during the Battle of New Orleans. And I'm very proud of this book because it has been accepted and is being sold currently at the gift shop at the Chalmette battlefield because of its accuracy. So I've got it kind of like the bookends. I start the series with the Battle of New Orleans, I end it with Katrina, and so in the future I plan on doing some filling in. We'll be writing eventually a book about the Civil War experience in Louisiana. I'll be writing about the battle for the against yellow fever at the turn of the last century, one of the great fights in American history, and also talk a little bit more about the brave Louisiana men who answered their nation's call and were parachuted into occupied France to work with the resistance prior to the invasion. These are some of the stories I plan to tell about Louisiana and about the brave people who live here.
Did you always plan on becoming an author?
No. In fact, as I have zero background in anything that has anything to do with writing.
Well, you took care of the next question I was going to ask.
I was a business major, originally planned to become an attorney. I decided I didn't want to be a lawyer, so I became a stockbroker. I worked in economic development. I have zero writing experience. And now I have 9 books published. I'm working on 2 more.
Because you are a history buff.
Yes.
And you want to share facts along with creating the stories and get the truth out there also.
Yeah, I've always had these stories in my head. And
Okay.
it's now I have the opportunity of actually putting it onto paper. And hopefully people will enjoy it.
All right, now I just was informed we now have about 4 minutes left in the show, so let's cover what you want to cover.
Well, the other series that I've worked on is what got me into writing in the first place, which is the interest of not only Jane Austen, but during the time period in which she lived. She lived during the Regency, which was also the Great Napoleonic Wars of Britain against Napoleon's France. This was one of the great turning points of history. And then I realized that it was pretty close to the Battle of Waterloo. So I've actually written a series of books about that time period using Austen's characters. The first one was called The Three Colonels, where I take some of her characters, add a few others, and literally put them at Waterloo. I followed that up with a ability to kind of play around and mesh some things, and I had an Austen character actually deal with a old Scarlet Pimpernel and talk about some of the things that were going on during that time. It's called The Last Adventure of the Scarlet Pimpernel. And I am now working on a Persuasion sequel, as well as a sequel to all 3 books called Rosings Park, which will follow some of the things that happened during The Three Colonels. So that's my Jane Austen Fighting Men books. And then I've written some other novels, a Western, plus a couple of just novels that I think are particularly funny that people seem to have enjoyed.
Jack, are you completely retired and dedicated to writing
I'm
now?
a full-time writer.
Why did you want to come on this show? What did you want to share mainly with the
I
audience?
wanted people to understand that if you have a story, you go out there and write it. And there's a lot of support out there. But what I would tell any writer who wants to get into this, first start reading the best you can in your particular genre. They're going to show you how to do it. And then copy that style, learn what to do, and then gather people around you who will tell you the truth. Because one thing a writer will always do is fall in love with their own words. And fortunately, I have 3 editors who are merciless, and they will tear apart anything I write and make it better.
Okay, Jack. So, where are you going after you leave here? Do you have a book signing coming up anytime soon?
Not this particular time.
Okay.
We had some book signings going on. Still getting myself settled into the new house in Prairieville.
That's right.
But there'll be some events probably coming up in the fall.
So, you already beat me to some of the questions I was going to ask.
Yes.
As far as what are you working on, but you're working on 2 or 3 things.
Basically,
huh?
I'm working on those, doing some sketching out for the continuation of the Louisiana series, and there's a few other books that have kind of toying around in my head. That's the one thing about a writer, it's if you don't get it out, you're going to explode.
Understand that when you're not writing and traveling, you do try to play golf.
I do try to play golf. I play at golf.
You play at golf? Well, you have a good time. Okay, well, now we're getting to the end of the show, and I want to thank you so much, for coming on the show. It's been amazing. It's been very interesting. I'm honestly overwhelmed with how many books you cranked out. How many books did it take you? How long did it take you for one book, say?
It takes me, usually on a book, it takes me about 8 to 9 months to write. Crescent City took me a year and a half.
Wow, wow. Well, I want to thank everybody that's watching Acadiana Open Channel and watching our show, Louisiana Heartbeats. And today we had Jack Caldwell on, which I'm sure we'll be hearing a whole lot more from you. And as he travels around, if you're interested, his information is on the screen. You can send him a message and ask him questions and find out what he's doing, or perhaps check out his newest release or when it's coming out again. Otherwise, if you would like to be on the show and share your dreams and your passion, Acadiana Open Channel is the place to be, because here you can be who you are, you can share your dreams, and it's freedom of speech. And I want to thank you again, and as the credits are starting to roll, I want you to continue talking and sharing anything that you may have forgotten to say there, Jack.
Nope, I just enjoyed being here. It's always wonderful to have a chance to come down to this part of the country, especially since the Civil War book will be taking place, some of this in this area, talking about the Red River campaign. So it's nice to take a look at the topography, because that's also what makes a story interesting, is working in the plains of Acadiana.
Well, I want you to know that we are so honored and blessed that people like you will come on our show and share what's going on, because I know you had to travel that distance to come here, but you know what? It's so worth it to be able to share your story with others out there, which will be on Acadiana Open Channel soon, and also YouTube and also Facebook. So again, thank you for coming on our show, and we're greatly appreciated that we have people like you willing to do that.
I enjoyed being here, and I hope to be coming back to the Acadiana area very soon.
Thank you so much.
All right.